In this section, I'm going to talk about visualising the guitar, well, how I visualise the guitar anyway when I'm either improvising or writing solos for a project that I happen to be working on, whether it be my band, Sacred Mother Tongue, or any solo stuff that I've done, past or present. When growing up, I basically started, using the pentatonic scale like everybody else, going through the first position, then kind of milking that, and then basically discovering that there was another 5 positions to kind of bolt onto that, and then spent the next kind of 17 years basically learning how to join all that up and come up with loads of different ideas and sequences. What I want to take you through in this section is basically looking at the first position pentatonic scale as like a kind of pivot point where you've got like your 5th position kind of sat behind it, and then 2nd and 3rd position kind of up from it. I'm going to do some of these examples in the key of E minor just to kind of make it really in the centre of the guitar, and then talk about some different techniques that you can use and also different ways of being able to visualise that. So let me just play the shapes for you. I'm going to start with the 1st position pentatonic scale and then play the 5th position down from that, starting on the 10th fret on the low E string, and then move up and play positions 2 and 3, and then we'll talk about some ideas of how to use technique within those shapes and how to maybe link some of these things together. So here's the 1st position. Okay, also the bluesy version of that. Okay, now I'm going to play the 5th position just down from that. Okay, I'm going to play the 1st position for you again, and then you can see the relationship to the 2nd position after I've played that. Then up to the 2nd position. And just the 3rd position after that. Okay, well this seems pretty basic stuff really, and most of you I would think would probably already know this, but the thing is it's one thing knowing the shapes and just kind of being able to visualise them normally, and then it's another to really kind of be able to see them properly. I can't really describe it in any other way than being able to properly understand how to move between these pentatonic positions, because obviously when you're soloing and you're coming up with melodic soloing ideas, you're not going to just go up and down the pentatonic scales as I've just played them. Obviously you're going to try and put some slurs in there, some kind of vibrato, all that kind of stuff that brings out the musicality in that scale, which is just a 5-note scale really. But there's different ways of being able to kind of really get to know these positions. I mean, I'm not going through like all 5. Actually no, we've missed out 4 I think, but 4 is quite an awkward one sometimes. I mean, you might end up finding that you'll use, I don't know, pentatonic positions 1, 5 and then 3 or something like that, which is probably the ones that I use the most. But I don't really ever just go up and down one pentatonic scale. I normally kind of interchange between like 1, 2, 3 and 4, maybe across 2 strings or something like that. But we'll kind of get to those sort of ideas. But a good way of being able to visualise these pentatonics properly is to maybe kind of mix them up a little bit. So you might go up one position and then you'll come down another, and you'll have to jump to that position and then visualise it coming back down. So you might go up one, down another, up a different one, and then down another one. So let me just play in context what I'm talking about, and then we'll break that down. So here it is. Okay, so I mean basically you can see that I went up 5th position and then down 2nd position, up 1st position, down 3rd position. Then when you've done that, you can basically kind of move in between each one, and you're only using notes from all those 4 positions. And that's a really good way of doing it. You don't have to play it at breakneck speed or anything like that. You just have to you know, play everything kind of clean and in time, either to a drum machine or a metronome, because basically when you start to speed this stuff up, it really does make a difference if you can play it slow and clean, because then, you know, as you build up your speed, it's going to basically keep that cleanliness but just get faster, you know, and especially at loud volumes and stuff, you want to be able to hear what you're doing. So I mean, another way of doing that is practicing picking as well. Now I've got a couple of picking things that would really help build up speed within your pentatonic playing. I mean, most people, when they're doing alternate picking, they start with a downstroke, which is kind of true of most people doing 3-note per string or even 4-note per string scales. But for me personally, I've always struggled with using downstrokes to start playing 2-note per string stuff. I mean, I'll play a kind of example, it probably won't sound anywhere near you know, as clean and as good as it should be, but this kind of highlights the problem that I have with picking in pentatonics. I've never been able to do that downstroke, but basically by switching that to an upstroke starting and just doing that kind of 2-note per string, you know, in the first position, makes a massive amount of difference, and it's these discoveries that kind of help you get to where you want to go. So if I just kind of change the downstroke to an upstroke on the 12th fret on the D string, this is what I end up with. And it's way cleaner, it's a lot faster, and I can stay in time, and I can pretty much sit there and do that all day, you know, which kind of means that I'm not putting myself under any strain or anything playing stuff that's fast. Now, I mean, that's just over 2 strings, but obviously when you're practicing this kind of thing, you want to do it over a bigger, kind of wider area. So, I mean, if you just start on an upstroke and you do a sequence such as this kind of thing, which is just, you know, going through your first position E minor pentatonic scale, but basically going up 3 strings and then down to the next one and then up again. So. And then just try and pick every note. When you get used to that kind of upstroke way of picking, you tend to find that you've got like a little bit of a rest stroke on the string, but it allows you to really pull the pick in instead of out. And I find that that gives you greater definition when you're picking doing this kind of thing. So when you play it up to speed, it sounds more like this. Okay, so you get really good pick attack, everything's really definite, and you can also get a lot of aggression out of that way of playing as well. And the same thing works for coming back down the scale as well, starting on an upstroke, and you should end up with something like this. Okay, so as you can see, using the same technique, it's still pretty clean, pretty aggressive sounding as well, but I mean, that's kind of an approach that I like. You know, I mean, growing up with players like Slash and Zakk Wylde, especially from the pentatonic point of view, this is very much a sort of Zakk Wylde style technique. I'm not entirely sure of his picking technique with pentatonics. I'm pretty sure it's maybe, you know, just using like downstrokes instead of starting on the upstroke. I've spoken to quite a few players actually about this, and it seems to be 60-40 in favour of doing the downstroke, but that 40% end up doing it with an upstroke. So it really does depend. I mean, I'm not telling you at home that you need to do it starting with a downstroke. I mean, this is merely my approach to how I would do stuff like that, but I've found that you know, upstroke picking, especially in pentatonics, has really kind of helped me a lot. There's a few other ways that you can train this technique, which is, I'm going to show you a couple of things. One would be this. Okay, so we're starting on the 14th fret on the G with an upstroke, then just alternate picking everything after that. So 14, 15, 14, 12 on the G. Then you should be on an upstroke on the D string on the 14th fret, and then a downstroke on the 12th fret on the D. Okay, then another thing you can try is that lick, but then putting just 14-12 G, 14-12 D twice afterwards, so you'd have this kind of thing. So, you know, again, it's basically making just two simple concepts, you know, put back to back, making it a little bit more interesting. So you've got, you know, rhythmically two things going on rather than just repeating the same lick over and over again. You know, and this is kind of how you start to build different patterns and sequences that you find really work for your playing. You know, especially when you're improvising, it's nice to have some of these patterns ingrained in your head. So, you know, if you're going to play a solo that you don't know what's going to come out, at least you've got a few ideas to kind of throw in there. You know, I mean, this is all technique based. I mean, not forgetting that you're going to throw bends in or, you know, things like this. You know, all those kind of, you know, almost rock cliches, if you like. But I mean, you know, if you start playing guitar and you really can't bend a note with any sort of decent vibrato, you know, any amount of technique is going to sound great until you hit that last note. And you know, in my experience, I mean, sometimes when people play like really fast, you know, alternate pick runs and stuff like that, if it kind of, you know, ends up being a mess almost, or it could be a bit cleaner or it could be better. If they hit that bend and put some nice vibrato on it, it kind of makes the whole thing work. But, you know, the other way around, it doesn't quite work as well. You know, if you do a really precise alternate picked run or whatever, and then you end up putting a really pony bend on the end, it kind of ruins the whole thing, and all you remember is that bend, and then you just forget about the technique. So, you know, there's always an argument between good technique and good feel and, you know, vibrato and all that kind of stuff. But I mean, if you can get the both to kind of marry up, then you really are on the road to, you know, developing your technique in a very good way. A couple of other things using that upstroke technique, you know, just over 2 strings or whatever, would be stuff like this. So again, you know, you're going to start, but this is where you start to extend out and using a couple of positions of the pentatonic scale rather than just using one position. I mean, we're going to get to some 3-note per string stuff later in this DVD where it's going to combine 2 positions of the pentatonic scale. But for now, we're just going to be using first position E minor pentatonic, and then we're going to be using well, basically, we're going to be using notes from the first position and the second position, but those middle notes on the 15th fret belong to both positions. Okay, so basically we're just starting with an upstroke on the 17th fret on the high E string, and then just alternate picking between the high E and the B string, and then we're just alternating between notes 17 and 15 on the high E string. Okay, so I mean that really is just as simple as that. But you know, if you get a lot of these techniques clean, and when you play them fast, they can actually sound really, really impressive. So up to speed again. So again, towards the end of that, I started throwing in some different rhythmic variations of that. You can do like double picks between 17, 12, 17, 12, and then 15, 12, 15, 12, while still playing 15, 12 on the B. So you'd have the doubles. Then you could just play continually down, or then back up again. You know, you can really put all manner of rhythmic variations in there. It just keeps it nice and interesting. And also that idea that I took from the G string that we looked at actually also works in other areas. So you could try this. And a good way of incorporating that would be to play that lick, which is 14, 15, 14, 12 on the high E string, and then 15, 12 on the B. Then you could have your double pick from 17 to 12, back to 17, back to 12 on the high E string, and do this. Okay, so when you put those two together, you should have something like this at a slow tempo. And then when you speed it up, you'll have something like this. You you know, and you can start to extend it out. But you can start to see that from little acorns, you know, grow big trees. And you know, you start small with these techniques and different scale fragment ideas and all that kind of thing, and then you just extend it through the different positions that you've learned. So, you know, in that last lick, we ended up going through first position, second position, third position, but just kind of extending out. And each of those kind of wide interval licks are using two parts of two different pentatonics. So first and second position, the third and second. Then you've got a little bit of fourth up there, and then thirds, but you're just putting them together. Okay, so you can kind of build on that and start to grow. And I mean, you know, this isn't really sort of, you know, technically precise, but I'm kind of playing as I'm talking just to really drive home the concept that you don't have to play the same thing all the time. All these little concepts and stuff can really change up, you know, what you're doing. You know, to the point where if you're just doing 2-note per string stuff, you know, you can literally go through different shapes. So you might start on 3 or something, then go down to 2, then you can go halfway down 1, and then end up in 5th. You know, that kind of thing. So, you know, you're starting from a high point and going low, and you're actually incorporating 4 different pentatonic shapes while using that upstroke picking technique, and you'll probably end up with something like this. Okay, so I mean, let me just explain that for you, so you've got your fret numbers and the technique and everything. But you can pretty much see from that example that, you know, once you've got a technique down in one position, you can then just stretch it over different, you know, pentatonic shapes that you've learnt. And you know, it really isn't too difficult. But in the beginning, when I was playing through these positions slow, it's a good idea to just sit there and do that for quite a long time. The problem is with practice is, you know, the very nature of the word sounds too studious, too kind of boring, really. I mean, I must admit, from me personally, I've never been one that's really sat there and, you know, and kind of practiced and practiced and practiced, in a sense that I'm kind of looking at the clock thinking, oh, you know, what time's this going to end, you know, so I can go and watch Neighbours or something. You know, I just literally just sit and play, and the time just seems to kind of escape. And I end up thinking, you know, I've played for 8 hours and not even realised that the time's passed. So, I mean, I suppose you've really got to enjoy it, you know, rather than just kind of do it for the sake of it. But, you know, when you start to see progress, you know, especially with just simple things like pentatonics, even though they don't, you know, come across as the sort of thing that a shredder, you know, would do. You know, you'd think more kind of, you know, Yngwie Malmsteen, Paul Gilbert, you know, with the harmonic minor style stuff and all the swept arpeggios and all that kind of stuff, which is great, don't get me wrong. I mean, you know, there's a fair amount of that in my playing. But I think you still need to have a solid grounding of, like, you know, a pentatonic bass to sort of like build on, because even when I'm playing things like arpeggios and 3-note per string alternate runs and all that kind of stuff, I'm still looking at the guitar in like a sort of pentatonic framework, you know, which is basically the whole point of this section, is to really sort of put across the idea that, you know, pentatonics kind of live in everything. So if you use that as like the ultimate roadmap on the guitar, in my opinion, it's not everybody's opinion, but if you use that as your basic structure and you see the guitar in that way, then everything else just kind of slots in between it. And that's when you start visualizing the guitar a lot better, especially when you're improvising, because when you're playing on the fly, you need to be able to, you know, kind of look at the guitar and go, right, where am I going? Obviously, you need to know what key you're in, because, I mean, you're not ever going to turn up to a jam and play just in the key of E minor or A minor or B minor. I mean, you know, most guitar players play in minor keys. But, I mean, even if you're playing in major keys or whatever, you've just got to, you know, you're still playing the same pentatonic shapes, you're just doing them in a different order. But, I mean, that's kind of a theory road I don't really want to go down to confuse everybody. I'm just trying to keep this as simple as possible, you know, because the simpler your brain process, you know, the easier it is to just, you know, not think theory-wise about what you're playing, or necessarily, you know, the shapes and why they sound the way they do. It's basically more to kind of visualise it as more of a puzzle, and then just work on your technique and, you know, make it clean and make it precise, and obviously just basically make it work for you. But anyway, that fast pentatonic run that I just played, I'm going to break down, and we're going to start up on the 19th fret of the high E string, and we're going to have this. Okay, so starting with an upstroke, we've got 19, 17 on the high E, then 20, 17 on the B. Then we're going to have second position this time, so that was third position. Then we've got second position, which is 17, 15 on the high E, then 17, 15 on the B. Then we've got the first position now, so we've got 15, 12, 15, 12 B, that was the high E, so. Then 14, 12 G, so. Then do the same thing again, three string pattern starting from the B string. So we've got this. Okay, then go back to the 14th fret G, 12th fret G, 14, 12 on the D. Then we're going to move down into the fifth position and then continue that sort of three string approach. So you know, you're always going down in sort of stages of three strings, if you like. So you've got this. Okay, so that fifth position would just be 12 down to 9 G, 12 down to 9 on the D, and then 12, 10 on the A. Then we've got 12, 9 D, 12, 10 A, and then 12, 10, 12 on the low E. Okay, so at slow tempo you should have this.